I cannot believe it's Wednesday already.
Best day of the week.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, I don't know.
And
Friday, payday, Wednesday. I don't know. This is still a good day.
yes, that is true. I mean, the dynamic's a little bit different when you're an agency owner now, right? It's like it's not necessarily Friday or anything like that. It's like it's end of the month. You're like, is anything left in the account? Like, can I buy groceries this month?
Did the tooth fairy
So,
leave you something under the pillow? Absolutely.
yes, yeah. What did I not spend in leads and advertising this month that I can use to feed my family with? So we're just getting going here. Reminder, everyone who logs in or watches the recorded version, this is Sell Like a CPCU. We are live every single week, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central for Precious, who is in the beautiful state of Texas. We are put on by the CPCU Agents and Brokers Interest Group, and this is a show dedicated to giving you tips, tricks, rules, hacks, all kinds of good stuff when it comes to sales and specifically insurance sales. So please give us a like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet. We're not on Instagram, so I can't tell you to do any of that stuff, but, whatever you need to do in order to get that stuff out there so insurance professionals can get this information. So this week you're coming to us from Lovejoy headquarters, it looks like, which is fantastic.
You love my new digs here?
Yeah.
Special shout out to Abby for pointing me in the direction of the green screen universe. So that's something that seemed, a little bit over the top. I didn't know if I needed it for the level of stuff that we do. But I don't know. I was also feeling a little bit inadequate after last week when, Tony Conyers was on and he, had his very polished studio effect. So I said it's time to invest in my craft. So yeah, exactly. So, that's the beauty of virtual, remote work is that you get to, choose the backing of your choosing. So, yep. I wish this was in person. Maybe one day. I'm calling it into the universe. But no, today is just brought to you by a green screen that arrived via Amazon.
Yeah, well, and next week we need to get you like in Aruba, at least virtually, coming to us from Aruba. So
exactly.
No,
on location.
I am still stuck in my regular, my man cave away from home. I guess I would call it. I don't know. It is my office. But so that being said, this week we are talking about rejection.
Rejection.
It is, unfortunately to say, it is probably one of the most frequent things that you come across in sales. Well, I don't know if you're good, you get it nailed down. Like maybe it's not the most frequent thing, but it's definitely one of the biggest hurdles to get over. Were you good with rejection before you got into sales, Precious?
No.
Yeah.
Anyone that knows me knows that I have very thin skin. I have very tender feelings. I want everyone to like me, and so trying to isolate it and figure out, how do you walk away without it making it awkward? How do you leave the door open so that they can come back if situations change? Yeah. And so, we've all sat through a sales training, and they tell you, "Oh, you're getting closer to your next yes," and it's a numbers game, and that. But it doesn't. It stings. It hurts, especially when you feel like you've gone the extra mile. And you're like, you will never find service like this. But I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter.
Yeah. I always had those moments. I wasn't good with it at first either. I was never. Some people are just born with, like some innate skill to be like, well, whatever, screw you. I'm going to move on to the next thing. I'm not that kind of person. Even with good interactions with people, I'm always kind of like analyzing afterward. Like, what did I say? Did I get my point across? Could I have said it differently? Like maybe it was perceived the wrong way, something like that. And so, to your point, I'm like, whenever that big rejection happens, you're always like, well, man, they're going to come back to me like, crying with their hat in their hand and everything. It doesn't happen. Like, I mean, once in a blue moon, but it doesn't. You have to be able to kind of like just move past it. But so what did you go through in order to kind of be able to deal with it better?
I think, like I said, obviously calling things out first things first, recognizing it's not personal, you know,
That's true.
especially in this environment, right? I mean, asking, does it ever become fun to get rejected? It's like asking someone if they ever enjoy being like broken up with.
Yeah.
Like, not if you, were committed to it. No, it's never fun, right? But when you recognize that, it's kind of that glacier effect. There's that
Yeah.
part that's above water that's visible to you, but sometimes there's such a looming presence below the surface that you don't see, that there may be outside reasons that they're not either comfortable or feel necessary to disclose to you. You know,
Right.
and
Right.
so some of those pressures, I learned early on, in more of a customer service role, that embarrassment is most frequently enshrouded and passed off as anger,
Hmm.
you know. And so it's just one of those visceral, reactions.
Yeah.
Oh, Tony said rejection to specialty. See, come on down. I'm telling you, you've been able to run the board with this. But yeah, when you realize that there may be something else going on here that has nothing to do with me,
Hmm.
that's really the driving force.
Yep.
Or sometimes, to your point, getting that feedback, if someone's open to giving you that feedback,
Yep.
so that you can, again, you have your intention and how you want to come across. And maybe if it's some, outside, the perspective that you need so that you can, change things and maybe have a different outcome. So
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot to it, of using those as growth opportunities, but then also some things you just have to shrug off and move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you walk away just not being able to answer the question, right? Like, I mean, the one question that I always ask myself is like, all right, where did it go off the tracks, right? Like, where did I lose this? Was it at the beginning? Was it the close? Was it just, the product wasn't the right fit? To your point, you can go drive yourself crazy trying to figure out like the what ifs or the hypotheticals of like, are they just having a bad day, do they have a boss who's breathing down their neck to make a decision and that's why it didn't go my direction. Like, it's really tough to kind of fill in those blanks, but yeah, it's one of those things where you're always going to do analysis afterwards. So let me ask you this: my analysis is almost always, and it might be like the immediate gratification or kind of like closure thing that I'm always looking for. I'm always kind of like analyzing it immediately after, which probably isn't good because I need to kind of like take some time to like
Let it
distance
air
myself
out.
from it. But at the same time, I'm also worried that I'm gonna forget the nuances and the particulars, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm always gonna worry that it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever played like a hand of poker, but like in a hand of poker. As you go through that hand of poker, there's nuances that happen at every single stage of that hand of poker.
Mhm.
And if you take time before you end up looking back at it, now you're like misremembering. You're like, did they raise? Did they hold fast? Did they twitch? Like, did they smile at me? Like, what, you don't remember the particulars of the interaction. So I'm always kind of analyzing it like immediately after. It sounds like you take a little bit of time before you do that.
So, one of the things that I have to remind myself is that I'm very methodical and very strategic. I like to kind of build out a process that, for the most part, is proven and it works.
Mm,
And I try to stick to the baseline because if you are too reactive to
mhm.
something, it's statistics, right? If you flip a coin 100 times, but the key is it's got to be, again, same coin, same person flipping. There's certain variables and then there's certain, things that are,
There's
if
actually a
if you
small
change
percentage of time. There's actually a small percentage of time that the coin lands on the edge. Did you know that?
oh, no. So you're gonna go for like the statistical anomaly, I'm
I
gonna go
You're
for
talking to a super
grounded.
nerd here. Of course, I'm
I
going to tell you
know,
about
I
it. But
know.
no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah.
That's
So,
what I'm debating with the
law
engineer
of
on
large
the
numbers.
physics of it. Exactly, exactly. I dig it. I understand. But the
Yeah.
overall takeaway is if you, again, and I don't do sports analogies often, but it's this spring. I figure why not, So if you're at bat and if you swing differently every time, then the odds of you, connecting, or you're going to, screw it up. So sometimes what works when one customer. It's going to resonate with them. It's going to be spot on. It's going to go off without a hitch. And then the very next time, it's not a good fit. The answer to that can't always be to change the approach. Because if you change your approach, you're going to miss the next time it lines up and it makes sense. So the key, I think, oftentimes is learning how to decipher the buying cues, and kind of read the room, if you will, and figure out how to play your hand. Oh, look, he's passing through. Hi, bye.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. Like the structure of it definitely has to have consistency, right? Because if you're just kind of all over the map, I mean, it is the science nerd in me who's like, all right, you can only have one variable, right? If you have too many variables, you don't know what the real reason was. Something worked and something didn't, right?
Scientific method, yes.
Yes, and so from that standpoint, I think the dynamic there is, like you're saying, like try and have the structure in place, and maybe not even torture yourself over every minute detail, but try and get the big stuff right. And so, those buying cues are very big pieces of that overall. Like, I can't tell you how many times, like, I sit down with new salespeople, and there's something that the prospect, or even I, when I'm kind of like going through the motions with them, like that I will say, which is like, that's the go for the jugular time. And they will continue to try and like explain benefits and features and stuff like that afterward. And that's not a nuance. That's a big deal. Like that's the buying cue. That's the time to like jump in and actually make the sale. And so to that end, I think you're right. I think you need some structure, and you need to worry about the big things. The really small things might end up being too small because they're too particular to just that one individual. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of focus now, I think more than before, on the customer experience, because
Yeah.
you can have all of the right ingredients, but just be preparing the wrong dish for the wrong audience.
Hmm.
Being old enough to have a pre-insurance life, but still having. And so as a restaurant manager, that was always a big piece of the training, is how do you identify the diner and how do you give them the experience to maximize the customer experience. So,
Right.
case in point, if you have a business lunch, they just want to keep the glasses filled and just be present, but don't be invasive, right? Because they're
Yeah.
there to discuss things. If you have somebody's 30th year anniversary, that couple, they're tired of talking to each other. They came out because they want to know, oh, how long have you worked here and what do you
Yeah.
recommend? And they want that more hands-on experience. If you
Yeah.
have that young family, the kid at the table, you bring some crackers for them to chew on ahead of time. You kind of ask them, what's the run time here before the kid expires and has like a tantrum.
Yeah.
You have a couple that's out, so I can go on and on, but the point was, when you can kind of identify who the buyer is, then you can deliver on and focus on what their priorities are to try to
Yeah.
obviously increase your odds. But sometimes, again, we're complex individuals and there's so many different factors. Like you said, is there a third party who's, leaning in on this and that you don't have any visibility on? Are there pressures? Is it financial? Is it, something else happening? And so that's where it kind of sometimes just not that's probably the biggest reason why I'm not a high pressure closer.
Mm.
Because if you apply pressure and there's some outside influence that you're not aware of, then you're going to apply enough pressure to break it.
Yeah. Yeah. And their immediate response is going to be defensive, right? Like the
Oh
walls
yeah.
come up, and it's like, I'm already dealing with this stuff over here. I don't need to be dealing with you kind of like putting the screws to me. Yeah.
Oh, it's 2021. That's how you get ghosted.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true. Hello? Hello?
That's
Hello?
when your emails go to the spam blocker and your calls go to D&D, And so much of what we do, just the industry as a whole, especially in sales, is statistics. I mean,
Mm,
data rules. As much feedback as I can get, if someone's willing to do so, almost like an exit survey.
mm,
So oftentimes when I go into the quoting, intake conversation, I kind of find out ahead of time, what other options you're exploring, what's really going to be the deciding factor,
yep.
trying to get some things that you're going to use to nail down the sale later.
Right.
But what I found was really fascinating is I hopped on Teledoc the other day for something that was, not emergency in nature. And
Mm,
before I could schedule the consultation, the last question it asked me is, had it not been for this service, what was your alternative? What would you have
that's
done?
interesting.
Would you have
That's
gone to
interesting.
the ER? Would you have just foregone, being seen altogether? And so that piece of data, if the customer is willing to share it with you, hey, we're going to take a pass on this proposal. Oh, did you find something elsewhere? Was it the timing? Was it the pricing? Can you kind of share with me? Because some of those things may leave the door open for X dating.
Yes. Very true.
So if they liked you enough where they got through this whole process with you and the timing was off, hey, can we put a pin on it? Check on it up, when it's up for renewal. Maybe things will be different on either side and we can revisit it.
Yeah.
And that's, again, where that data collection and being able to understand, that's the biggest hurdle. When you find someone who likes you enough to engage with you during the quoting process,
Mm,
that's gold.
yeah.
And so, I think that's a missed opportunity in a lot of places because we have hurt feelings. They didn't want to do business with me, and you just cut and run.
Yeah.
Where that might be the opportunity to say, "Hey, Matt, I know last year we kind of got on it a little late in the game. Do we have a chance now? Let's revisit it." And so you have to be able to think with that long term plan,
Mm.
the long game, not the short game.
Yeah. No, that was one thing that got hammered into my head specifically, but most of the salespeople when I was at my former employer was you don't lose until you stop trying, right?
Yeah.
Like the moment that you stop trying. Now, you can end up like self-sabotaging, right? So like if you do cop an attitude on the way out the door, you're killing any future opportunity. The beauty of the product that a lot of us sell is that it's an annual renewal. So
Hmm.
every 365 days, you get another at bat, right? But there are things you can do to make sure that you don't get any at bats again in the future, and that's the things that you want to avoid. So, look, sometimes, especially when it's larger accounts, you need 2, 3, 4 at bats before you finally end up writing that account.
Hmm.
And each one of those things you could look at as a failed like a failed sales process, or you could look at them as 3 or 4 steps to the ultimate sale, right? And it's a different mindset that way. So, the failure aspect of it, I think, is also really important to put in perspective. Like, is this a failure or is it just a not yet? Right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times we hear not yet, or the prospect says not yet, but we hear no.
Hmm.
It's almost like forgive the archaic analogy, but it's like dating, right? Like sometimes you hear, like, you ask the other person out and you're like, and they're like, not right now, I just got out of a relationship or whatever, I got stuff going on in my family and things like that. And a lot of people will take that to heart and think of it as outright rejection, when truthfully there could still be possibilities there. You
Hmm.
just have to give it some time and maybe come at it from a different angle, that kind of thing. Um,
Now,
I
very
love that
rarely are
aspect of
you
not
gonna.
burning the bridge.
Yeah, about to say, very rarely are you going to latch onto an analogy I can't ride with you on, and I've been so far removed from the dating scene.
Well, I mean, me too. I'm just kind of saying, like,
That's what we hear. That's what
hypothetically.
we hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it worked back when we were doing this, to be
Well,
clear.
I mean, full perspective, like both of us have baby faces, but we're like, older now. I mean, like, I cannot even imagine being part of the dating scene or most aspects
With
of
this
life now
technology, I can't even
with,
imagine.
the apps and stuff like that. It's just like, Myself and my wife, we met at, the Chamber of Commerce face to face at 7 o'clock in the morning, getting awful coffee and trying to sell each other on our services as a business owner. I could not imagine what that's like now. But that being said, even then, I would say, there are still probably some analogies built in there.
Yes.
Like, the first
The
interaction doesn't
timing.
always go great, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
And also being able to gauge, because I started off saying if you have a proven process, then you just stay consistent to a process. But step one is, do you have a proven process? Depending obviously on what your arrangement is, if you're a captive agent, if you're an independent agent. As an independent, what we run into a lot of times is the prospects that are our warm market that we seem to have the most pull with may not be a good fit for the markets that we represent.
mm,
And so sometimes you have to do some calibration and you have to figure out, is there a mismatch? Do I need to either change my marketing? Do I understand the appetite of who I represent so that I can bring them more of what they can say yes to,
mhm.
more of what's going to be, competitive? I know several of the carriers, MGAs, you'll periodically get like a hit list from them. Right. And so
Yes.
they'll show you, hey, in the last 30 days, we're really, killing it when it comes to these exposures. We're writing a bunch of nail salons, daycares, they kind of tell you where they're really good. And so based on that hit list, you're like, I have, a pretty decent, opportunity here to do a deeper dive. And so if I know that that's kind of the more successful, opportunity, I might be able to set my sights and drill, where there's gold,
Right.
but at the same time, on the flip side, again, even with the captive arrangement, if you understand more of whatever changes your company might have made from an underwriting perspective, then maybe where to, again, if it's, very focused on, they're just really hot with this particular exposure, do I need to pull back on the marketing that I've thrown, in the opposite direction? So
Yeah.
not to say that you never change, because if you've noticed that's just where the disconnect is,
Mhm.
that maybe they're, not as competitive, not as quick, whatever that missing link is that's kind of causing you not to seal these deals, firm that up.
Yes.
But, just this notion of, kind of, again, showing our age here this time, when you play the video games and you're just like, okay, finish them. What's your move? Like, what's
Yeah.
your closing deal? And, I have, friends and colleagues that built their books of business years ago where it's like, oh, well, I take them out to dinner, or, all the pre-COVID stuff
Yeah.
that we could do, and that's not feasible anymore. So we have to
Mhm.
be flexible enough to say what is really going to be the deciding factor. And I'm a huge fan of asking some of those questions before giving those answers becomes threatening. For
Mm.
example, I like to ask about target premiums, expiring premiums before I give my proposal. Because if you put your number out there and then ask them for it, you're not going to get it.
Mhm.
But if you kind of find that out on the front end of the conversation, when it's less intimidating to ask the question, make it just more of a matter of fact gathering, then you kind of know you can go into some of these proposals with a little bit more confidence.
Oh
you
yeah.
know that soft commitment, if we can deliver on these things, pricing, coverage, timeliness, are you committed to move forward? So those soft closes early on is how you pull off the big one at the end.
Yeah. So now, when it doesn't hit home at the end, right? Like it's something that, whatever. There's something unforeseen that came up. There was. I mean, hell, clients lie, right? Or prospects lie, right? Like, so
Imagine that.
they might tell you that, like, oh, it's the product and the fit and stuff like that, and all of a sudden they're going to come back to you and be like, well, actually someone came back and it was like 5% cheaper, so that's what we went with because it was cheaper. Sometimes they just lie, right?
Mhm.
That being said, I think the idea of, all right, you've recalibrated, don't take offense. I think, it's not uncommon for them to be either one defensive. I mean, the first thing that I thought of when you said, like, what's the target premium and stuff like that. So many of them are like, oh, well, I'm not telling you that. Like, just give me your best price, like whatever that is, because they feel like, you're just going to undercut that price by a certain amount. And you're like, you
Hmm.
realize I have no control over it, right? Like, I mean, they tell me what the price is. I can kind of jockey a little bit when I play them against each other, but ultimately it's not like, I conspire with the underwriter and I'm like, hey, you can get this for, this amount of money. Um, that is something that I think we all run into, but at the end, then you can recalibrate, right? Like it's almost like the risk management process. It's an iterative process, right? So
Hmm.
when you put that sales opportunity or multiple sales opportunities through the cycle, and you see what comes out the other end, you get to then ask your question. All right, are we not developing the right opportunities for our close carrier partners?
Hmm.
Um, are they the right opportunities, but we're just going about selling them, in the incorrect way? Are there externalities that we're not taking into account in terms of, whatever it is, how we interact with the clients or freaking COVID and things like that, right? Like all of those can kind of go into that reanalysis process in that cycle. And hopefully you end up kind of like fine tuning that engine. The other thing I would say here is if you don't like rejection, you need to figure out a niche for you to go after because rejection is going to be much higher. Like you said, if you're taking if you're taking a different cut at the baseball every single time, it's going to be a higher failure rate. The other higher failure rate is like, if you try hitting righty and then you try hitting lefty and then you like, that's even crazier. And so you can't be, or today you're playing baseball, tomorrow you're playing cricket, the day after that you're playing lacrosse. Like your skills have to morph and change for every single one of those. And so I can't stress this enough. Like you need a niche. Like you can't just be like, hunt and kill whatever moves. Like it's just not going to work that way. So, all right. So let me ask you this: what's your favorite coping mechanism? if you execute on everything and it still just doesn't hit home, how do you kind of like lick your wounds before you start over again?
I think for me, and of course everyone's got their go-to, is sometimes when you're just really feeling like you just can't pull anything off, being able to reflect on your wins,
Mm,
you know, like, hey, they don't like me, but I've got this, oh, people have said yes to me before, right?
mm,
Let me just kind of look at my book of business and wrap myself up in the deck pages and say I've got customers.
yeah,
I can do this. But no, in all seriousness, just being able to reflect on why you do what you do.
yeah,
If you know that you gave it an earnest effort, if you know that you did all those things that you were supposed to do, then it's easier to kind of write it off statistically as a necessity.
right, right,
I
right.
remember a mentor or, a training camp I gone to years ago that said if you stood on the street corner handing out $100 bills to people passing by, somebody inevitably is going to turn you down. They're suspicious. They don't, whatever, and so everything is going, obviously if there were no rejection possibility, it wouldn't be called sales.
Right.
It would just be enrollment or, whatever else. But with what we do, it's totally necessary and it's a growth opportunity if
Mm,
you receive it that way.
yeah.
If you get to, again, defensive about it and you're unwilling to look at it and do, like you said, that post pitch autopsy. What was the cause of death? Now, one of the things that I will share in terms of just an encouragement to, obviously lessen the frequency and when that happens
Mm,
is that we tend to forget how valuable communication is,
mm,
especially if it's not something that turns around instantly. I'd gone through that exercise where if you've ever held on a phone line in silence for like 60 seconds, 1 minute, it feels like an eternity.
yep.
So when you have a customer that has an impending deadline and they don't know where you are in the process, panic ensues. They're going to
Yep.
go elsewhere because what happens if you just fell off the face of the planet? They can't leave their coverage in your hands.
Right.
And sometimes an answer, even if you don't have an answer, an update, right? I just want to touch base with you and let you know where we stand. I've submitted everything over. Ideally, this comes back in about 2 to 3 business days. As soon as I hear back, I'll let you know. But because I think so many times, again, back to the kitchen analysis, analogy in my restaurant days, when you forget to put an order in, the
Yeah.
tendency is you want to hang out in that kitchen until you can emerge with the plate in your hand.
Yeah.
You want to hide because you're like, oh, all eyes are on this door. If I come out and everyone has their plate except for mama, no one else is eating. And so it's like the more comfortable thing to do is wait until you can emerge with news, or you have a quote in your hand. And sometimes to show back up and say we're not done yet,
Yeah.
it's awkward.
Yeah.
So learning how to do that, or even better, if you have the ability to have almost a drip campaign style built into your systems, where, once the quote maybe gets updated from, quoted to proposed, and
Mm.
you set up an appointment, but then the system automatically knows that, okay, 3 business days post proposal, this needs to go out. Right?
Right.
That just says, hey, did you have a chance to think about it, talk it over with whomever, where do we stand? And then maybe 5 days out, so you have a process. And, the way that you say goodbye, my Dear John cutoff email, is typically along the lines of, hey, just following up, final follow up. Quotes are time sensitive.
Yep.
So I'd love to be able to give the underwriter an update on where we are. If this is not going to work, just you could reply back to this email, let me know. I'll gladly close up my file. Won't bug you about it anymore. If
Yep.
this was an oversight and this is still in the running, hey, reconnect with me. Let's figure out what we need to do to refresh it, get back on top of it. People by nature are non-confrontational, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't want that awkward, why don't you want to buy from me? Oh my God, I thought when I talked to you earlier. So they will like avoid that at all costs. So if I give them an easy out and just say, hey, look, no hard feelings. If you've moved on, if this isn't something that you're considering anymore, just as a courtesy, let me know so I can, stop barking up this tree.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the kind of like soft exit point, or whatever you might call it. If you're watching, we did an episode on selling by saying thank you, or I forget what we titled it. I think it's selling by saying thank you. If you haven't watched that, I would definitely go back and look at it. But I'm a big believer in, even when you get rejected, saying thank you for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's two things that I think people do very poorly at the end of a sale. One is expressing an interest in wanting to write the business. And I'm not talking about because of the financial reward or gain that comes from it. I mean a legitimate, heartfelt, Mr. Smith, I would really appreciate if you gave me the opportunity to work with you. I'm really looking forward to this. And I would love to start a long-term relationship by, putting this in place now. The second part of it is at the very end, regardless of what the result is, saying thank you, right? Like, you don't deserve an at-bat. Like, no one deserves an at-bat. You work toward an at-bat, but ultimately, the decision maker or the gatekeeper has to give you that plate appearance. And so if you get it, that's something. Like, even if you didn't get the sale at the end, that's something. They committed at least to a certain extent. And that also feeds into that long-term sales process idea. It's like, look, I know that we didn't get this one. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to compete for it, and I would really appreciate the opportunity to compete for it in the future. This is something that I learned. It's very painful in the public sector, because in the public sector, there are reasons outside of your control as to why you keep or lose or gain or, an account, okay? A lot of it has to do with political winds that change, right? Like, the wind can change, and you're someone who has been a very close business associate has to tell you, like, I have to fire you, and it's not because you did a bad job. It's not because I don't like you. I want to go out and get drinks with you after this, right? Like, in fact, they'll feel bad and buy you drinks afterward, but, you just have to deal with it. I can remember a moment in time where I was doing a co-presentation, and we had a public meeting for a school district that we had been the risk manager for over 12 years. And there was 2 seats that changed on the board. It created a flip-flop of the majority in terms of the politics, and we were essentially interviewing for our lives. most people told us, like our people inside, they were like, look, no matter how well you do, you're going to lose this. Like it was
Mm.
just it was a definite, and it didn't matter how well the other side presented or anything. But so we did our presentations, and if there were style points, we kicked their asses. Like it wasn't even close. They were stuttering, they didn't finish their points, all this other stuff. We had 12 years of history to go through and hundreds of thousands of dollars that we saved the taxpayers and all kinds of other stuff, right? At the end, what happens? The eventual the eventual conclusion happened exactly the way it was going to happen at the very beginning. We weren't able to shift the winds at all. And so much so to the fact that, the majority, we had one vote in our corner and
Oh,
everyone
wow.
else voted against us. It's politics. I mean, that's just the
Oh,
way
yeah.
it goes. But so there's open comment afterward. And I'm with my mentor, and there's open comment, and I walk up to the mic, and he does one of these like, "Oh no!" Like no, like he's worried I'm going to like drop the A bomb, like and just light them up. I got up in front of the mic. I said, "Look, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you for the past 12 years. I think we had a fantastic working relationship. I gave respect to the business administrator, who is not an elected person, but obviously has a position that's very difficult because she had to oversee the operations of the school district
Mhm.
at the whim of politicians. So I gave her respect, and I said, look, regardless of who's sitting in our seat, and I called it our seat, regardless of who's sitting in our seat, you have a fantastic business administrator. This school district is going to be in good hands. And I said, in the future, if we have the opportunity to compete again for this position, we would appreciate the opportunity. And then I sat down. And so, like, everyone's sitting there holding their breath, waiting for the shoe to drop. But the key was bowing out with grace.
With grace.
And I think there's a lot to be said about that. And it's almost, I don't know what the word is, cathartic or cleansing or something like that. But when you do have a moment like that, it's almost like, there's no number of glasses of wine that equate to the release of that tension like
Oh,
that
yeah.
moment does. But it's a big hill that you have to get over because there's pride that you have to fight. There is,
Hmm.
you're still dealing with fresh rejection and wound and stuff like that. But that's always what I felt has been extremely helpful is that impassioned thank you at the very end.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when it's some sinister crap that causes you to end up losing the opportunity.
Because the
Um,
referral opportunities too, you know,
yeah.
if it's not a good fit, and I always, preface it, hey, I've really enjoyed, our communication through this process.
Mhm.
I regret that, obviously that, if we're not able to close this deal, but if you know anyone else, who is looking for a more positive, open, communication, relationship with their insurance, I would be honored by your referral. You
Yep.
know, Cancellations are that way too,
Hmm.
because there's always that awkward moment. I think the question was posed, I had responded earlier this week, where you have, prospects that are afraid to go to the incumbent agency and ask for loss runs.
Mm. Or to tell them that
Because,
they're fired. That's
yes,
the other thing you're gonna run into. Yeah, like they're afraid to split
because that's
ways.
the kiss of death, and the agency knows that you're taking that with you because you plan to shop elsewhere. And then, but what's even more toxic is when the agency causes resistance in getting those documents,
Mm.
right? Where they kind of drag their feet. He's leaving anyway. It's not like he's not a paid customer anymore, so I'm gonna be really, salty about, helping
Yeah.
him go. I'm gonna drag it out on this rescission period, on this BOR. I'm going to make it hard for them to get on at their line. And it's like, there's absolutely no reason to behave that way.
Yeah.
If you do it with grace and with dignity, things change. I was in a position, not quite, to the extent of, what you shared, but nonprofits are that way too, in terms of, some of their due diligence, some of the board decisions. And so, I was the incumbent on an account for years, and they said,
Mm.
one of the things that we've adopted here recently is we want to put it out to market, every so many years. And so we need to shop it. And in this case, it was a customer that, I was not in the same state. And one of the initiatives for this organization was to support local businesses.
Mm.
And so that was the breaker, like, you've given us great service. We've always enjoyed working with you, but, we've got, it built in where, if possible, this money needs to be awarded to somebody, here in the XYZ metro. And it wasn't enough money for me to relocate.
That would have been great for me to know like 60 days ago. Thank you.
Right, before I worked this thing to the nth degree,
Yeah.
finessed it, and now you're telling me the whole time, you're like, hey, we just can't work with someone from Texas. I'm like, great, that's awesome. But no, you sit there and you kind of think about even your own, experiences as a consumer.
Yeah.
How many times have, you gone down this road, and like you said, you make a decision, and even a household decision, sometimes that's frustrating. I'm trying to get my husband on board. I'm like, I already told them that it was a yes. What do you mean it's a no? What do you mean you've already done this? Oh, that's going to be so embarrassing to go back and explain to them, hey, it wasn't you, it was me, and,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. I was walking through, department store the other day, and Nick, kudos to these guys that have these kiosks, or, they kind of are doing lead gen on the spot. Hey, who's your electric provider?
They're
And,
hustlers.
hey, who's your,
Yeah.
they're hustlers. And, I told my husband my cop out now is, oh, my husband makes those decisions. I couldn't even tell you who we're with, because they can't overcome that objection. I'm there by myself,
Yeah.
Now, if he's in the store with me, I can't do that, because they're like, oh, you guys together? She said you're the one to talk to, but,
None of them have tried the female empowerment line on you. Like,
you
oh,
need to
honey,
take a
you don't
stand
need
and
your
tell
husband.
him.
You're a strong, independent woman.
No, because that's when that Southern charm. Oh my, I
Aw.
just can't make that decision. That sounds complicated. My husband takes care of those affairs. I'm just here to get some milk and eggs, But yeah, sometimes, again, it's that natural instinct to, you don't want to, set expectations. And it's hard, especially when you've been positioning yourself as a decision maker, and you have to admit that it wasn't all on you.
Yeah.
And so giving people that out, knowing that the service that we offer is just that. This is a service. The ability, I love what you said about letting people know that you genuinely want to do business with them. I'm excited to see you grow. This is a fantastic concept, whatever you've got going on. I would love to be here and walk you through, these next steps. And so, I like to talk to customers about, based on where you are today, these are the recommendations, these are the coverages that we need. However, once you're ready to grow, expand, get that other location, whatever, I've got plans for that too. So I want to grow with you.
Yeah.
And so when you put it out there, and they accept the offer, you also have to walk the walk.
True.
And talk the talk. Because that's the other piece, is that in this day and age of social media, bad press spreads so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have to be mindful of just the interactions that you have, especially if you're working. That's the downside of working in a niche, is that if it's a really tight knit area that you work in, then your reputation is going to precede you.
Yeah.
And so if people know that you're just, you've got a sharp tongue, got a nasty attitude, you're hard to work with, you don't take rejection well, then you don't want to be, blacklisted from the opportunity to work with, not even just them again, but in their circles,
Yeah. Well, I think there's also an element there of not being fake, right? Like, so it is a balancing act, or maybe it's not as much of a balancing act as maybe people make it out to be, but you have to be authentic in who you are, right? So like, if you think as a salesperson your job is to like play a certain role or something like that, then yeah, you're playing with fire, because eventually it's going to come back where people are going to be like, oh my God, like I didn't even know he or she was like that. Like, they presented a completely different, image, right? Like, and so that is something that you have to deal with, where, like you said, in the current environment with technology the way it is, I mean, the truth will be found out.
Your one screenshot.
One screenshot, and you know what? No matter how much stuff you delete as well, there's time machines that look at the old versions of the internet. So if people really have like an axe to grind or something like that, they'll find something if you're not, genuine in who you are. And so it's better to just own it, like whoever you are, like own who you are. And quite frankly, if you do have a piece of you that's like toxic or something, you need to deal with that if you have the motivation to do that,
Oh yeah.
because that can also be one of those wild cards in that decision making process where, I've seen it in the public sector a lot, where it's like, look, you talk a great game, and the product and service offering look fantastic, but we saw this thing that you said over here, or you were involved in this issue. I mean, the one thing in politics is, like in business, the saying is like there's no such thing as bad press, right? Like, because you can always try and spin it or something like that, right? Like, you can always kind of pivot. In politics, if you're a service provider or someone like that, they don't like drama because they already deal with enough drama on a day-to-day
Understood.
basis. So if your name is even in a headline that's closely related to drama, they don't even care how good you are. They'll cut you loose. And so that's a big thing. I mean, like, controlling or not controlling, but protecting your reputation is a big deal. And that's also something that you have to think about. If that does end up biting you in the rear end, all right, well, why is that? Was I being fake? Was it BS? And now I have to go back and trying to expunge the record before I move on. All of those things kind of come into play. Do you have a favorite sounding board that you go to? Is it your better half or your other half, or someone
For
professionally?
industry stuff, yeah. I
Yeah.
think sometimes with professional things, like I said, my husband's in a completely different line of work. Well, not
Yeah.
not as different anymore now that I've entered the, transportation, risk, piece of the world, because that's
Yeah.
that's what he does. So sometimes now he gets the jokes and he
Do
understands
you
stuff.
commiserate with the bunny? Is that what happens? What happens?
I have to just go out into the middle of the night and just shout it into the universe.
Yeah.
No one's in no one's in hearing distance, and I bleep all the names to protect the guilty, all of that. No,
Yeah.
but yeah, finding your tribe is huge. Finding a place that you can either go to for resources or to air things out. And
Yeah.
so, I'm really excited and very fortunate that I've got colleagues that are in, similar roles. So again, they're far enough removed where it's not going to be awkward. We're not talking about people who are all in the same spaces. And, just kind of giving scenarios. One of my favorite go-tos now, not really a plug, but, on social media, as I do follow groups of like, adjusters, producers, and I kind of look at the memes and, kind of the jokes and stuff. And, it's just one of those, I think every couple of years the idea gets circulated about we ought to publish like some memoirs from the agent's office, and everyone just anonymously contribute, and just some of the hilarity of some of
Yeah.
the things that you get in this, like, or pictures of stuff that you couldn't, again, the underwriter jokes, right? You're like, who does that? Who builds
Yeah.
like that? Who would put it there? So yeah, so sometimes the anonymous outlet, now again, to your point, it's a double-edged sword, because
Mhm.
I go, I look, I snicker, I very rarely contribute
Yeah.
because I can't be the author of some of this
Yeah.
stuff. I might text it to somebody offline, but no, I can't have my name tied back to that. Like, oh, that's how she feels. That's what she does. And in that same vein, that's the other side of the coin. We've all had situations where the prospect was such a difficult person or organization to engage with during the quoting process, where you really have to ask yourself, I don't turn down revenue, but do we even have the bandwidth? Like, is this going to be too labor intensive? Is the same thing they tell you, like, during job interviews, never badmouth like your prior employer.
Yep.
I love the prospects at the first, they're just dragging the incumbent. They never, and I always. You're like, whoo, do I want to be the next name inserted in there
Very
as they
true.
move on next year? So
Loose
sometimes,
lips sink ships. That's the way it goes.
yeah, but sometimes it's mutual, right? Sometimes you have to say, hey, look, at this point, it just doesn't look like we have any options that are really going to be beneficial. So, here's all. I can send you a list of, our submission history, so you can take that wherever you're going, and they know who we approached and maybe why it declined. Kind of offering to, do some call ahead seating. Hey, let me help you. Just because I couldn't place it, just because it didn't work here, what are some things that I can provide to you that are going to
Hey,
make it easier?
so some brokers and agents get very territorial to the point where they won't like collaborate with each other, and I would say that that's a missed opportunity because you always need a network that you can refer to because
Absolutely.
there's, to your point of bandwidth, like if you're a principal in an agency, you get this. If you're just not just, but if you're a salesperson, if you're completely focused on business development, you think there's unlimited bandwidth and resources, and there isn't, right? Like
Hmm.
you can't say yes to everything. Like so, there are certain opportunities that you need to sidestep, or you need to like kind of do a warm handoff to someone else who has more or better capabilities to be able to deal with that.
Hmm.
I would say that there's some rejection that's really good rejection, right? Like it's rejection that you learn from, which is good, but there's also rejection where you end up finding out that you dodged a bullet,
Oh
right? Like
yeah.
there was a case that was really problematic going through the quoting process. They have all kinds of claims and stuff, or in the middle of the quoting process, something comes up where you're like, wow, I'm really glad that we didn't end up writing that because, I've had situations where, prospects essentially, fraudulently lied on the applications.
Hmm.
Have you had any, infractions or anything like that? Nope, nope, completely clean, ship shape, not a problem. And then you come back and you find out that some government authority has issued repeated, violations or something like that. And you're like, oh wow, like I'm glad that we didn't get involved in this, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that's the other angle. Is like sometimes, rejection isn't a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just one of those aspects of it's addition by subtraction, maybe I could call
Absolutely.
it.
And
You
it's
know,
confirmation because sometimes, again, if you're intentionally growing a book or you want to position and establish yourself to be, and you fill in whatever that mission or vision statement is, right?
yeah,
And if someone says, I don't want to move forward because you're not, and you're like, hey, that's actually spot on because I never wanted to be that. I'm not the one stop shop.
yeah,
I don't write, I've had situations where I've had to explain that, if you're looking for rock bottom, state minimum, that sort of thing, that's really not, that's not the scene here.
mhm,
That's not who we want to build with, you know. Um, setting those boundaries, sometimes too, because again, different strokes for different folks. If your priority is you need to do, really heavy self-servicing and you expect that I'm going to be on call 24/7, and that sort of thing, this may not, it's better to sort that out now
yeah.
than after we bind and now I'm on risk for the year and now we just have this really awkward, drawn out thing, so, it's
I
not a bad
I've
thing.
had large cases that we've lost that ended up being a net positive.
Mhm.
It didn't seem like it in the moment, but when you go back and you kind of reassess and you're like, wow, we were spending so much time and stress and anxiety on this one account, and it was actually a good thing that we got rejected.
Mhm.
Now we didn't put in like a half-assed attempt to retain it. Like we fought hard to try and retain it,
Mhm.
but at the same time, like you can look back in perspective and be like, you know what, we're better off
Mhm.
because we didn't end up, staying on that or winning that opportunity. So that's another aspect of this. Like it's not all negative. There's a
And it's
lot
not
of positive.
discriminatory to be, selective,
Mm,
depending on, like you said, when you, hang your shingle and you're like, this is what we do, this is where we do best, this is where we excel, this is really kind of, dead center where the sweet spot really is. And
mhm,
anything that's outside of that, I do love the building the network because I think that's such a better customer experience to have the handoff and
mhm,
say, hey, look, based on what you said, that's something that I really don't have the expertise. But let me introduce you to Matt because, they've specialized in stuff. And I think this is going to be a much better fit. And people appreciate that,
yeah,
especially because, obviously send it to someone who you vetted.
of
So
course.
there's
Yeah.
not the guilt by, by association with
Yeah,
sending them to
just
someone.
because someone handed you a business card that says they do X, Y, and Z does not make them a good alternative to refer these people over to. That's 100%. Yes.
So my last anecdote, because I have to, being the Southern girl that I am since I'm down here in Louisiana, years ago I was in a training class. I don't even remember where I was in this training class, but one of the young ladies in my class she looked at her phone. It was like her grandparents calling. She says, "Oh my gosh, I have to take this. I hope everything's okay." So she steps out of the classroom. She comes back and she's just like in full blown, like hilarious, like tears, just laughing. Right. And I'm like, what happened? Like, what's the deal with that call? I'm assuming everything's well, you're laughing. And she says, yeah, that was my grandma. And she called me to tell me that Pawpaw found a kangaroo in the backyard. I'm like, kangaroos aren't native to Louisiana. Let's escape from the zoo. And she says, that's not even the funny part. I said, oh, wow. Okay, it gets better. What's more funny than that? Her concern wasn't the fact that potentially wildlife was loose in the backyard and there was a kangaroo or whatever. She says, I don't think I have a good recipe for. She's like, but that was the biggest concern. It wasn't.
That was not in Orleans Parish. I know that much.
Cover it, throw it in a gumbo. It all comes out. But that was the concern. And so sometimes you catch something in your net, and you don't have the recipe. How do you even break that down? Like, I wouldn't even know how to get it in a pot, and I get so many, especially that's the thing. I love technology and innovation. I get the folks that get on the phone and what they're looking to do is just some really fringe stuff. It's just out there. It's never been done, and on one hand, you want to get in on the ground floor, but you already know the insurance industry, all of our stuff is lagging. Right. Yeah. It's really not designed for cutting the first, of the first to do this. And so sometimes, it's just like, hey, I dig it. Right. Best of luck. I, think that's really going to work out. I wouldn't even know what kind of app to put that on. What kind of supplemental, like, what do you even call that?
Yeah.
So learning to bow out and say, hey, I'll save my pots and pans for the things that I know to cook. Yep. But nope, that was the concern. So that was this classic Louisiana.
I kind of know, having gone to school down in Louisiana, I kind of know, like, I have an image of who you were talking to. Like, and I kind of know what the plot of land looks like too.
You're
like
right. When Pawpaw caught a kangaroo out back, that's just classic, So don't let the kangaroos loose. Just call animal control.
That was the worst jumble I have ever eaten in my entire life.
Like a spare tire.
It was stringy. I couldn't get through it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go too deep into that story.
That is a fantastic. That is a fantastic story, and it completely applies. That is awesome.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's all I got. We went an hour. This was pretty good. See, like, you don't need to. You don't need to go tie one on and go to the bar every single time you get rejected. There's some good, there's some bad, there's some
absolutely
coping stuff that you can do that's positive. So hopefully everyone had a fantastic time watching this episode. If you have ideas for future episodes, let us know in the comments or reach out to us individually. We would love to talk about things that y'all want to hear about. Yes. See, that's my Southern coming out. Like those are the first two things, y'all and big ol'. Those are the two phrases that first come out.
Just don't put them together. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. You don't use those in close proximity, that's for sure. But yes, if you all would like to see a certain topic addressed or question answered, we are more than happy to, craft an episode around that. So definitely looking forward to hearing some feedback. And that's pretty much it. We will see you next week at Wednesday on 3 p.m. Any parting notes there, Precious, from the boardroom?
Nope. I think that pretty much takes care of business. So we're here for you guys. Let us know what we can do to best serve you, and we'll be on next Wednesday.
Awesome. We'll see you next week, all.
All right. See ya.
Bye.